So, I'm going off script with this one, more so than I always do. Because, man, what can I say about that? What can I say about this show, this season of this show? I guess, first of all, this one does at least have some corgis in it. Atticus himself is not one of them, as far as I can tell. But there are corgis in this one, which bumps it up a couple of points, I guess. But at the same time, I don't even feel like it's appropriate to make that joke. Like I was going to anyway, because I'm me. But I don't feel like it's right to do it this time. I definitely understand why this show ended up moving over to HBO Max. Because while this is still a show that I think is accessible to kids, this is a season that very much any kid who watches this is going to have to sit down with their parents and actually work through some of the stuff that happens, assuming they're old enough. Like little kids, I don't think would really be bothered by some of the stuff here. But there was a lot of shocking stuff in this season. Like, season 2 did it too, but season 1, I think, even more so, really dealt with some mature subject matter, the kind of stuff that kids shows don't really deal with much. But like, this took things a step further, and I don't know specifically, they kicked things up a notch after moving to HBO Max, or if they had to move to HBO Max because they wanted to do this story and couldn't on like regular Cartoon Network. But I'm 100% sure it had to have had something to do with what moved the show over, right? Like, I'm trying to think of a quick and dirty summation for this one, and I just can't. This one's too complex. Like, it starts out like any other season of the show, except that it focuses on those Apex brats that we got introduced to a little bit last season, primarily following the two leaders of that group, Grace and Simon. And man, I did not like either of them at the start of this season. I have known people like both of them. Their behavior hit a little close to home. In fact, I did a little bit of reading about the characters prior to making this review. I read some stuff off the wiki about some stuff that the creators said about Simon in particular, that he's a clinical narcissist, like my dad. And that while that doesn't make him inherently the bad person that he was right up until the end in this season of the show, that coupled with the fact that he got swept up in an ideology, a dangerous ideology that he wasn't able to let go of, turned him into the person he becomes. The clear allusion here being to religion, though I feel like this could work with basically any kind of ideology, like politics, for example, would work too. Basically, the Apex have formed a cult around a distorted idea of Amelia, the false conductor from season 1. Grace met her when she was a kid. When Grace was a kid, not when Amelia was a kid, right? She found herself in a terrifying situation where it seemed like Amelia, in her conductor robot suit, saved her from one of those big tentacly mask guys. I can't even remember what they're called anymore. From back in season 1 again. And then after she met Simon, not long after that, she told him the story of what happened. Filled in the blanks with made-up details like any kid would. And the image of Amelia as the conductor, with all of her many glowing numbers, built up in their minds until she effectively became a god to them. And they built a cult around her and absorbed other kids into it and led them down a destructive path. The first episode of this season has the Apex leading raids on other cars, at best maiming and torturing denizens of the train, and at worst killing them. And we do know from dialogue throughout the rest of the season that And it was Grace who came up with it, which is the more horrifying part, because she's the likable one. They have killed denizens in the past for fun. These kids are murderers. And, like, clearly the deaths of these denizens are meant to be stand-ins for any kind of ideologically driven violence, including systemic violence, since it is part of the system that is the apex that this violence spreads. We got a little bit of this last season. I didn't really talk about it much, because I knew I was going to have to talk about these characters again here. I didn't know they were in this season. But they see the denizens of the train as nothing, as less than people. It's a racism message.
What's wrong with Knowles?
You can't trust them. You never know what they'll do.
But Tuba is good.
Oh, well, Tuba is one of the good ones.
Encased in a cautionary tale about dangerous, sweeping ideologies.
See, Lucy? It's nothing. Just something to play with when we're bored. And honestly, you're boring me. Apex! May our spirits be high!
And our numbers higher!
Down with the false conductor!
The Apex reveals the truth!
And that's what makes it so complex. If it was just a racism analogy, it would be one thing. If it was just a cautionary tale about dangerous ideologies, it would be one thing. But it ties them together as they are often tied together in real life. In the real world, systems like organized religions breed the kinds of people who, because they are told by their system that they know what's better for the world, come out of it thinking they know what's better for the world. It's comforting to them, and the idea of giving up that belief, or even letting it sway at all to accommodate different kinds of people, is terrifying, because it risks them discovering that they're wrong. And you see it all throughout history. Systems like that breed things like racism. It's systemic racism. The exact topic that's been such a big deal with, like, police violence and stuff today. And so it isn't because he's a narcissist that Simon is such a bad person by the end. It's because he gets swept up in that ideology and refuses to give it up, despite the fact that he is given so many chances. And I do mean given, because I still think, while some terrible things definitely happened in this season, overall, this was still 1-1's plan to try to minimize the amount of damage done. Because, like, we know from even the narrative of this specific season that these two were here back when Amelia was in control of the train. They were here prior to season 1. We even saw them on a console display back then. So it makes sense that after he retook the train, 1-1 would construct a new way forward for them. So I still think that up to a point, obviously, he's still in control of things here. Because obviously he doesn't know everything. He can't calculate everything and plan for every inevitability. There are going to be some variables that he can't account for, because I still think that Amelia's overthrow of him was genuine. I don't think that was part of any bigger plan. When Grace and Simon are ejected via the unfinished car that we saw all the way back in season 1, and end up in a place where they meet Hazel, a character who turns out to be a denizen who can pass as a passenger. There's that racism thing coming in again. Who is companion to an actual denizen, a more conventional denizen, who is powerful enough that they can't just dispatch her immediately, but who can also help Simon and Grace to hopefully learn empathy towards other denizens, and then sending them off into cars where they have to perform the task in order to get out. There's no way to brute force it, and where Simon gets reunited with someone he feels betrayed him in the past. All of that feels too geared towards redeeming both Grace and Simon for me to think that it's all a coincidence. Because somebody said in the comments of my season 2 review that these train cars are not made for individual people, that The cars are obviously meant to help multiple people. But this is an infinity train. Again, if the title is literal and the train really is infinite, I need you to understand there is infinite of each of these cars. And each of these groupings of cars, like each of the totalities of these cars, are arranged in an infinite number of different orders. Because there's only so many different ways that themes and ideas and objects can be combined together to create people and environments. When you're dealing with infinity, naturally you're going to have infinite of each of those combinations too. Which means even though Simon kills that more conventional denizen, Tuba, there's still infinite Tubas out there. If the train really is infinite, that's inevitable. And that doesn't diminish the suffering that this specific Tuba experienced. If I suddenly became capable of cellular budding and created 1 million additional me's, and then one of them died a horrifying death, the fact that there were still 1 million of me would not diminish the fact that that one me suffered. But that doesn't mean that Tuba in some form isn't still out there. Like, there may be exceptions to this, like Samantha, the Catherine Janeway cat. That's a Voyager reference, by the way. Who is just called the cat. She might be unique. There might be other denizens who are unique. Like maybe Alan Dracula from last season is like a unique prototype for a new kind of denizen. But I really do feel like the other denizens are numerous. Right down to different individuals existing in infinite quantities. And I think the season confirmed that with, what was his name? The water creature that's always hanging around Samantha. In this, it could also be that he can just spread himself out a lot and break up into multiple smaller beings. But it really implies that there's a whole bunch of him in one place at one point. A whole bunch of individual entities with his same identity. Because Amelia, who was in this season also, by the way, she was great. Maybe she's being a little cynical because she's a little cynical. But she says flat out that he sees the passengers as numbers. They're numbers to him. What if everything is numbers to him? Then wouldn't it make sense that if he really does have infinite resources, that all of these people would also exist in multitudes? And all of these cars would also exist in multitudes? Because honestly, frankly, that's really the only scenario in which I can be okay with what happened here. It's the only way I can be okay with these people murdering so many people. If those people still exist out there somewhere, that makes it a little bit better, right? Where do you draw the line? Isn't allowing these denizens to be killed by these children, who even Amelia says 1-1 doesn't care that they exist, aside from the fact that they're passengers with numbers, implying that there could be a different state of his being where he does care that they exist and does take direct action to stop them from harming these denizens. But it doesn't creating the denizens to specifically guide humans towards bettering themselves as people. Isn't there something morally bankrupt about that too? Creating these people with real feelings and lives specifically to serve others? Like, I don't want to make the slavery analogy because it's definitely not the same thing, right? But it almost feels like it could be analogous if you really wanted to take it in a specific, like far enough in a specific direction, right? So the only way I can be okay with that is if each of these people are like programs that can be just created and recreated and maybe even reset. Because at the end of the day, who is the villain of this season? Really? Is it Simon? Like, in the most direct possible way, yeah, it's Simon. He does the most directly morally corrupt things. He tries to kill Grace, who rounds out to be the real protagonist of the season, twice, once indirectly and then once directly. He murders Tuba, and he tries to trap Grace in her memories for as long as he possibly can. I don't know if he expected it to be forever, but he probably hoped it would be forever, right? He does the most awful stuff on screen, but at the same time, the Apex only exists because of Grace. Because she, as a manipulative person, because that's her thing, she manipulates people and withholds information from them to control them. That's the thing she has to learn to overcome. But being a manipulative person, when she was given the opportunity, she talked up her own experiences and made a big deal out of having had that experience with Amelia. An experience that Amelia didn't even remember. She didn't even notice that Grace was there. And that led to that inflated image of Amelia that they then passed between themselves and then passed to the other kids in the Apex and created that cult to begin with. But then at the same time, Grace couldn't have had that experience if Amelia wasn't on the train fucking stuff up. If Amelia had just gone through the train like normal, then Grace could have just gone through the train like normal. But then if the train hadn't made the mistake of scooping Amelia up, she couldn't have screwed everything up. So who is the villain here? It's the flawed system. And I don't think the show is telling us that the system that is the Infinity Train itself is any more perfect than any other system. Just that at the end of the day, it's the one which more often than not causes the least amount of net suffering, if that makes sense. And especially if you consider that 1-1 was still in some way in control of this situation, I think that all lines up. But man, it really bums me out that after all of that, after experiencing all of that through this season of this show, I already know we don't follow Grace next season. Like, she doesn't get off the train here. Her number still exists. She's gonna help the other Apex kids try to get their numbers down so they can go home. But I really want to see that happen. I really want to keep following her. Like, Amelia at one point in this season talks about how she's trying to make amends for all that she did. And yet, her road towards redemption is one that we could never follow to its logical conclusion. Because it's such a long one. But Grace says we could. And I mentioned I know people like this, like these characters. In real life, Simon reminded me a lot of my dad, for example. And Grace reminded me a lot of myself. Like, just kind of the broad strokes, right? Like, I didn't come from a rich family like she did. I wasn't specifically manipulative like she was. But looking at it from the perspective of she was a true believer in this religion that she helped create. It's not technically a religion, I guess, but I'm going to keep calling it one for simplicity's sake. Just the fact that she genuinely thought that she was doing good. That even manipulating those other kids, she thought it was for the best because she thought she was leading them down the right path. I can really relate to that. Even having someone like Simon in her life, enabling that by being her partner in crime, kind of reminds me of, again, having somebody like my dad who was a bad influence on me. I used to not be a good person. Like, I don't know if I am now, but I know I'm definitely better than I used to be. And the scariest thing was, I didn't realize it. And if the majority of you guys talked to me back then, just had a chill conversation with me, I don't think you'd notice it either. Because I wasn't like cackling mad or anything. I had been brought up in an environment where I was taught that certain things were correct. I went to church, and like, I'm not gonna rag on anybody for being religious, but religion itself can be very damaging, especially if the people you associate within a religious body are a specific kind of people. Religious institutions, they tell you, we know the truth. We know how the world works, and we know it better than anyone else. And if anybody claims that they know it better than you, better than how we told you it works, then they're stupid or they're lying. You don't have to pay any mind to what they say. It breeds a sense of superiority that when you mix it with somebody who already feels superior to everybody else, already feels like the world revolves around them, who already can't stand to be wrong, and then on top of all of that, it's a system where you've got people arranged in a hierarchy with like church leaders and stuff, right? That's the kind of system that breeds a lot of negative stuff. Because at the end of the day, the only difference between Grace and Simon was that Grace was able to recognize the flaws in her character and admit that she might not understand the world as well as she thought. She was able to open up a little bit more each opportunity she had to do so, and Simon just wasn't. Simon's story is a tragic one. Again, I know people like him. I know people who found themselves swept up in similarly appealing ideologies, and even though they should have known better, they were never able to work their way back out. But at the same time, I know people like Grace, people who feel responsible for things that are the fault of the system that they took part in. Like, going back to my own experiences, my very first presidential election, I helped elect George W. Bush. So even though it's absolutely ludicrous, even though I didn't do any of these things, I feel at least partially responsible for all of the terrible things he did as a result of that. He and his administration did, starting for-profit wars. Wars that have been going on longer now than some of the soldiers fighting in them have been alive. I feel partially responsible for that. Even though I couldn't have known any better, I had been brought up by people who believed things. These are the same people who took me to church every week, where I was told, we know better than you. We know better than anyone. This is how the world works. Everybody at that goddamn church was a Republican. I was raised up into that situation, and I'm lucky that I found my way out of it. And I'd like to see Grace continue her journey out of it, and continue to become a better person, and continue to try to make amends wherever she can. Because I feel like that would be very meaningful to me. I'm getting way more personal than I intended to. I liked season 2 better than this. Man, even though it was kind of cathartic to see what happened to Simon, considering how much he reminded me of my dad, I really hated seeing him fail. Like, there's a subgenre of TV shows I like, which isn't even, it's not a real subgenre, it's a subgenre personal to me. Like, one of my favorite shows, for example, is Home Improvement with Tim Allen, who is a bad person. But his character in that, Tim Taylor, reminds me of my dad, but like if he was slightly more reasonable and was actually willing to improve as a person. So seeing Simon given those opportunities to improve as a person and then fail to take them, it was difficult for me. I didn't enjoy it. Like, this was a quality season overall. It's actually the first season of the show that I feel would actually diminished. It would be diminished if they gave it more episodes. Because I feel like even expanding on some of the details that were only implied here would have taken away from what was actually on the screen. And man, the things it says, things which are so nuanced and don't have easy answers. These felt like such real people. It was very, very good. I just personally still liked season 2 better. But man, you should watch this season of this show. And if this is the kind of nuanced theming that we're going to be getting going forward, first of all, I'm really looking forward to season 4 now, even more than I already was, which we're getting to. I have it scheduled to be reviewed on the 22nd of May, so that's something to look forward to. But man, we need to get this show renewed. There's an ongoing campaign, I think it's mostly happening on Twitter, to get the show renewed for season 5 and on. We really need to get it renewed. This is a very good show. But bring back Atticus, and don't hurt him anymore, please. But bring back Atticus. I really miss the little guy. Again, I apologize for this one being so tangential. Is that what you'd call it? Hopefully you were able to follow most of what I was saying here. And again, I want to reiterate, I'm not saying religion bad. I'm saying religion can be bad. And you should take caution before you immerse yourself in any sort of ideology, which is also what this season of the show is at the end of the day saying. Definitely, let's get a discussion going about this season of this show in the comments section down below. And while you're down there, see, I can do this part on autopilot, so it's going to come a little faster. While you're down there, you might as well like the video and share it with anyone else you think might enjoy my content. Subscribe if you haven't. I'm trying to get myself out there, and I'd really appreciate it if you guys can help. You can also check out my social medias and my Patreon. Links to those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.